Hello, everyone. Kurtupo here. I'm a little bit sick, so sorry if I sound kind of weird. Well, I always sound kind of weird, but but I'm back with another tournament, Battle Stadium singles tournament. Woohoo! I had a lot of fun with the last tournament. I definitely learned a lot, like a lot, not just in the tournament, but also since then. I've kind of been, not I kind of been, I straight up have been looking forward to the next opportunity to do something like this, and it came rather quickly. I must say, I've really been enjoying these kinds of tournaments where, I don't know if I mentioned it at all during the last series, the kickoff tournament series, but I'm really used to the kind of style of tournament where they pull up pairings and you kind of have a couple days or maybe a week with your opponent to kind of schedule a match. It's it's kind of different because all the tournaments I've ever been to, both IRL and online, well, obviously IRL, have followed the kind of be there or be square method where it's like we start at noon, and if you're not there and you haven't checked in, then you don't get to play. And these kind of tournaments I've been enjoying a lot. I definitely think I'll join more. Well, as many as I can handle. I'm pretty busy IRL. But yeah, enough blathering. I did want to quickly go over the team I will be using in this series. As it stands, basically they put up pairings, and then I didn't notice that they did that until 3 days later. So I kind of had to scramble to kind of find out my opponent, how to contact them, etc. And that was almost a week ago when I first contacted them. Excuse me. Well, it's been a little bit less than a week, and earlier today, like 10 minutes before I started this recording, they kind of let me know, said, "Hey, I'm kind of quitting Pokemon." So I don't actually know who I'm facing. I'm not going to mention their name because I don't want to throw people under the bus, and I'm sure they have their reasons. But I don't actually know who I'm facing, and more importantly, I don't know when. So I'm kind of recording this kind of in advance. I did want to kind of record this, obviously a bit later, so that the team I'm about to present to you is going to be more like the team I will actually be battling with. But since this has happened, I just figured I'd go ahead and record it. So I think I'm just going to jump straight into the team. No, just kidding. I'm going to jump straight into the rules. So it's from last time. I kind of sat down here and talked about all the rules. Spoiler alert. Now we know how the rules are going to be changing throughout the years, excuse me, and that is in seasons. And so last season's rules are the same as this year's. There's only one key difference, which is the Gigantamax. Also, I now know it's called Gigantamax and not Gigamax, thanks to everyone who pointed that out. And so you can see the list of Pokemon on screen. So presumably the next time that one of these tournaments is held, the amount of, or excuse me, which Pokemon can Gigantamax will be different. But other than that, it's the same rules as the last tournament. They're all on screen for your viewing pleasure. And now I'll jump into the team. So this is a team. Jake Cantsay made this team. I'll link I'll link his channel in the description down below so you can check it out. I think that's all I'll say for now. But I kind of just took this team for a spin. Obviously, during the last tournament, during the kickoff tournament, this was kind of the backup team in the very first video in that series. I don't know why I'm calling it series. There's only 3 episodes. But I did say that I would probably steal someone else's team for rounds 2/3, and of course Sandy Vish was the team I used because that's the one I'd been playing with on cart. And that's the same case, except unlike last time, I've played a lot of games with cart, so much so that this is the team I've been playing exclusively on cartridge, and I've gotten to Master Ball and a little bit beyond with this team. So unlike last time, I'm very, very familiar with this team and how it plays, its strengths, weaknesses, etc. I'll talk more about those things specifically later, but I'll run through the team because this is not the team I'm going to be using. I kind of modified the team. But yeah, let's just quickly go through. This is a Mimikyu. This is the same Mimikyu everyone seems to be running. Life Orb, Jolly, Max Speed, Max Attack, Shadow Claw, Play Rough, Shadow Sneak, Sword Stance. Not much to say except Mimikyu. Mimikyu was arguably the best Pokemon last generation, and while I don't think it's the best Pokemon, it's still definitely one of the best Pokemon this generation. So I won't talk too much more about that. Then we move on to Tyranitar. We have Tyranitar and Excadrill. How do I say this? So a lot of teams, the majority of teams that run Tyranitar Excadrill run Excadrill with Mold Breaker. It's fake sand, but now everyone runs fake sand. But we're running real sand. We have Sand Rush Excadrill, spoiler alert. So that's why Tyranitar holds the Smooth Rock. Smooth Rock increases the duration of Sandstorm when you use the move Sandstorm, and it does stack with the ability Sandstream. So when Tyranitar hits the field, we get Sandstorm for 7 turns, which is very nice because the rock Pokemon in Sandstorm, such as Tyranitar, have their special attack boosted, almost as if they had an Assault Vest on. And so that's great because that means we can instead invest almost completely into our we did invest completely into our defensive stats. So Tyranitar is very bulky. It can live at least one super effective hit, and it's very likely that Tyranitar will stick around when it's on the field. We have Rock Tomb, Flamethrower, Thunder Wave, and Stealth Rock. Stealth Rock is very good. Obviously, it breaks focus sashes. That's mainly what it does, but it provides very good chip damage. Thunder Wave is very nice because, as I mentioned before, Tyranitar can almost always take a hit from something, so we can pretty much guarantee a paralysis, barring missing it, which happens sometimes. Speaking of missing, Tyranitar does have Rock Tomb. Again, thank you for everyone who pointed it out. Rock Tomb exists. I didn't really consider Rock Tomb because, again, my background was in doubles, or it is in doubles, but I always ran Rock Slide. To me, Tyranitar and Rock Slide go together like two things that go together. But now that I'm in singles, I now understand the importance of Rock Tomb, and more importantly, why I should be using that instead of Rock Slide on a slow and defensive Pokemon. Flamethrower is here mostly just for Ferrothorn. You'll notice that Rock Tomb is a physical attack and Flamethrower is a special attack, so that means that our nature is relaxed, which means we have speed reduced. Obviously, having a speed reduction is not ideal. However, we wouldn't want to lower, say, our attack or our special attack because those are pretty important. Flamethrower is only barely a 2-hit KO on Ferrothorn, and Tyranitar has an awesome attack stand, so we don't want to diminish from that. And speed is the stat that matters the least because we're always taking a hit anyway, so being able to outspeed our opponent isn't that big a deal, especially when we can reduce that speed through Rock Tomb and Thunder Wave. We then have Charizard, Flamethrower, Hurricane, Solar Beam, and Dragon Pulse. It's timid because we absolutely have to outspeed. If I learned anything this generation is that in singles, speed is always important, but this is especially important in singles. If you don't run max speed on things, on your offensive mons, then you pretty much auto-lose a bunch of matchups. There's one key exception, and we'll get to that. But Charizard is very good, very powerful this generation thanks to the Dynamax phenomenon. Flamethrower turns into Max Flare, which sets up the sun, which not only raises the attack power of our fire-type moves, it reduces the power of those super effective water-type moves, and more importantly, with the sun, we can activate Charizard's ability Solar Power, which further increases the damage done by Charizard. So usually we're going to be clicking Max Airstream thanks to Hurricane to boost our speed, then we'll click Max Flare to set up the sun, and then we sweep from there. Solar Beam is very nice. We'll be setting up the sun, so even when Dynamax runs out, we can still use those super powerful grass moves. And lastly, we have Dragon Pulse. Max Whirlwind is pretty good if we feel that Um, well, Dragon Pulse is pretty situational, but it deals with some very big situations, mainly Dragapult, and occasionally Draco Vish. Charizard is running the item Heavy Duty Boots. Charizard is rock and rock. Charizard is fire and flying, which means it's 4 times weak to rock, so Stealth Rock is a big no-no. As soon as Charizard switches in and there's Stealth Rock on the field, Charizard basically cannot live any hit, which is very bad. So Heavy Duty Boots is here to completely negate that effect. And I'll talk about why I'm not a big fan of heavy duty boots. Well, it's pretty obvious. It's because in literally any other situation, heavy duty boots is absolutely useless. So I did end up changing that. And then we have Excadrill, one of my favorite Pokemon this generation, and this is really the star of the team in my opinion. Earthquake, Iron Head, Rock Slide, and Brick Break. Actually, I don't think the original team had Rock Slide. I think that's a mistake. But my new one, my iteration of the Sandy Vish team, does have Rock Tomb. It's Jolly, Max Attack, Max Speed. I already mentioned why Speed is super important, and it has the ability Sand Rush, Max Rockfall via Rock Slide. We'll set up the Sandstorm so Excadrill can make itself faster, and in addition, we have Tyranitar with that Sandstream and Smooth Rock. So a lot of times, it's not too difficult to have Excadrill be the fastest thing in the game. We have Weakness Policy because thanks to Excadrill's Steel and Ground typing, as well as its natural bulk, allows it to live pretty much any super effective attack, at least when it's Dynamaxed, and of course, being able to say, click Max Rockfall when we Dynamax as our opponent hits us with a super effective move. We've now doubled our speed and our offensive, and now we can just plow through the opponent's team. It's very nice, very good. We do have Brick Break, which is kind of a move I'm still not sure if I should get rid of in favor of something like Swords Dance. We'll talk about that a bit later, but Brick Break will turn into Max Knuckle, which will raise our attack, although it's not as powerful, but it is more powerful than Brick Break. Brick Break is mostly here to Max Knuckle when we don't have anything better to do. That's usually a situation where we're Dynamax and we procced our Weakness Policy, but we don't really want to click Iron Head or, Max Steel Spike or Max Quake because we're already so low on HP. The defense boost won't matter, so we just click Max Knuckle instead. But of course, Brick Break is nice because it'll break opponent's screens, so stuff like Grimmsnarl is not nearly as threatening as it would be otherwise. Speaking of plowing through opposing teams, we have Draco Vish. Draco Vish has one job, and I'm pretty sure you all know what it is. It is clicking Fish's Rend. We're Adamant Choice Band. If you don't resist Fish's Rend, and sometimes even if you do, you're going to die. No questions, really. I really like Adamant Choice Band. We're putting all our eggs into one basket whenever we use Draco Vish, and usually it works out in the times where, well, not it usually works out. It usually doesn't work out, but if we can identify a situation, or an opponent's team that is weak to Draco Vish, and we can say, hey, Draco Vish just sweeps here, we absolutely demolish teams. Enough said, really. I'm pretty sure you guys are all familiar with Draco Vish and what it does. We then have Vikavolt, Volt Switch, Guillotine, Sticky Web, String Shot. This is, at first I think I mentioned this in the previous tournament as well. At first I wasn't super on board with Vikavolt, because all it really does is set up Sticky Web and die, really, most of the time. And occasionally we click Guillotine, which, when you have to play to your outs, you have to play to your outs. This is modest, max speed, max special attack. I mentioned in the last tournament that I wasn't a big fan of speed. I can now confirm that speed is super duper important because even though Vikavolt is super duper slow, when things are in sticky webs or in string shot, they are even slower. So having that extra speed, if only a little bit, well, Vikavolt has like base 40 speed or something, but with a good enough speed investment, we can outspeed anything after a string shot, which is super duper important. We are Focus Sash because although Vikavolt has pretty good defenses, it's super slow, and more often than not, opponents' leads will be more offensive than defensive, and so Focus Sash is kind of a necessity. especially if we are relying on Vikavolt to get up Sticky Web. So that's the team. That's the Sandy Vish team. Once again, shoutouts to cantsay. I will actually. I do have the rental code, so if you do have the Sword and Shield games, I recommend you check out the rental code. He did make an updated version with things like Charizard having Air Slash instead of Hurricane, because that way you're not clicking Hurricane in the sun, which is a 50-50. So I'll reach out to him, and I think I'll put that rental code in the description, or maybe I'll put both. I don't know, but you will know. But I mentioned that I've been playing with this team a lot on the ladder on cartridge. I got into Master Ball with it and a bit beyond, and I noticed some things. And the first thing I noticed right away was that this team is very, very weak to Gyarados. Simply put, we have no way of really checking Gyarados, unless, I don't know, they led Gyarados as we led Vikavolt and we clicked Volt Switch. But we're almost, whenever we bring Vikavolt, it's almost always as a lead, and Gyarados is almost never a lead, so we cannot depend on Vikavolt to beat Gyarados, and instead we were usually depending on stuff like hoping we got enough chip damage earlier and hope it already used its Dynamax such that Charizard can use its Dynamax and click Max Airstream. Not the best game plan, especially when Gyarados is so common and very threatening, especially with those Moxie boosts. Another thing I realized pretty quickly is that it's pretty awkward against Mold Breaker Excadrill with Focus Sash. That seems to be what most people are running. I mentioned Mold Breaker is almost the norm now, which is kind of weird to me. Maybe it's not weird to people who have been playing singles for a lot of time, but as a doubles player, seeing Excadrill with Mold Breaker is kind of not. It's kind of foreign to me, but I do need to learn, and I'm pretty sure I have learned. I would like to say that is the norm in singles, and so facing Mold Breaker Excadrill, especially with Sash, which again is the most common set in my experience, it's kind of awkward because Excadrill and Charizard can take care of Excadrill, but not if it has a Sash, because then, say for example with Charizard, we bring it down to its Sash with Flamethrower, and then they just click literally any rock move and KO Charizard, even when it's Dynamax. Same thing with Excadrill, except we just trade Earthquakes. But then, we're speed tying, and that's pretty awkward as well. So that was another thing I noticed. Mold Breaker Excadrill with Focus Sash isn't an auto loss by any stretch of the imagination, unlike Gyarados, but it is pretty awkward having to navigate through that. Another thing I kind of realized is we don't beat Dragapult consistently. One of the first things I realized when playing with this team was we had no way of beating Dragapult unless we led Mimikyu, because if we did not lead Mimikyu and they led Dragapult, it's very easy to Dragapult, especially if it's weakness policy, to kind of just tear through our team. Thankfully, for some reason, whenever people bring Dragapult, they tend to lead it. That kind of confuses me, but so as you can see, not as you can see, but as you might have seen on streams. Oh yeah, by the way, I stream. Shoutouts to that. Links in the description. It's always been in the description. But what usually happens is they lead Dragapult. I know they always lead Dragapult, so I always lead to Mimikyu. So whenever I see a team with Dragapult, I'm always leading Mimikyu. So the game is always Dragapult versus Mimikyu. And so I always click Swords Dance, they always click a move, and then I KO them with Shadow Sneak unless they Dynamax. And if they Dynamax, then we're kind of in a problem. But that's only in the offensive set. If they were, say, screens, then of course that situation is different. And there's so many Dragapult sets. Well, there's not a bunch, but basically what I should be doing turn 1 depends on the opponent's Dragapult. And that's not always easy to do. I'm not experienced enough in this game, in singles, yet, where I can tell what kind of, or not tell, but I can infer what kind of set my opponent's Dragapult is based on the rest of the team members. I'm not quite there yet, so I personally don't know, I can't tell what kind of set Dragapult is. I'm always playing mind games with myself of whether or not I should click Shadow Claw twice, or should I go for Swords Dance. What if it's, say, screens, Dragapult, etc. It's a lot of things, and I feel like it wouldn't be that big of a deal if I were a better player and I were more experienced, but the reality is I'm not. Additionally, I felt like I wasn't using Dracovish pretty much at all. Yes, there were games that I said to myself, oh yes, Dracovish would absolutely sweep this team if we set up webs and stealth rocks. That's usually how it is. But in literally any other game, which was most of the time, Dracovish was dead weight. I told myself the opponent's team has too many faster Pokemon, too many bulkier and problematic Pokemon, that Dracovish isn't really worth bringing, and so I never brought Dracovish. So with all these things in mind, I said to myself, okay, there's only two paths really. I could either get better at this game, such to a point where all these awkward things I can play around with using my better knowledge, case in point, the Mimikyu versus Dragapult thing, or I could kind of just go all in and say, okay, I will never know what my opponent's Dragapult set is, so I'm going to bring some awkward set, knowing that my opponent's always leading Dragapult, or knowing that I will tend to get myself into these situations where Gyarados sweeps or where I'm speed tying Excadrills. Instead, saying, okay, I'm gonna assume that that happens all the time, and I will bring my own sets, weird and wacky sets, to counter it because I don't really have another choice. And so that's what I ended up doing. I imagine if I had more time / I was a better player, I would go with the first option. But this is the team I brought. You'll notice it's very similar to the Sandy Vish team. Now it's Sandy-ish because there is no Vish. There's no Dracovish. I said swap it out with Galarian Corsola, and we'll get to that when we get to that. Also, I just realized I have a bunch of special attackers that do not use the attack stat. Those should have a 0 attack IV, though I imagine you guys didn't even notice that. But yeah, Kasib Berry Mimikyu. So Mimikyu is not holding the Life Orb item, which means his attack power is reduced, but it doesn't matter because when we're up against a Dragapult, we always click Swords Dance. They always say they Dynamax, they click Max Phantasm, our defense is lowered, then we Dynamax our Mimikyu, we survive Max Phantasm even at -1 defense, thanks to that Kasib Berry, and then we always KO back with Shadow Claw, and now we're a +2 Dynamax Mimikyu, and we can put in the work against the opponent's team. Literally the only thing I'm worried about is a lead Excadrill. I did try a Babiri Berry set, because that way we could survive an Excadrill's Iron Head, but without Life Orb, we're not 2-hit KOing Excadrill, so there wasn't really a point in that. I instead decided to prepare myself for the Dragapult matchup. We then have Tyranitar. It's the same set, I'm pretty sure, so I'm going to skip that. You go back to Charizard. Charizard does have Air Slash instead of Hurricane, which is very nice. However, we did change the item for Citrus Berry. Heavy Duty Boots came in pretty clutch in a bunch of games. Cantsay, I did mention that Cantsay updated this team his own alterations, if you will. And in that team, he replaced Heavy Duty Boots with Sharp Beak because in his experience, Heavy Duty Boots didn't come into play enough. But the way I do play this team, Stealth Rocks came up quite a bit because I would always bring Charizard in the back, and the opponent, knowing that, would always try and set up Stealth Rock. And so Heavy Duty Boots came in clutch, but it didn't come in clutch all the other games. So instead, I decided to kind of play it safe, go for the middle ground, and bring Citrus Berry. So, because of course Citrus Berry is infinitely more useful in the matchups where Stealth Rock isn't on the field. And if Stealth Rock is on the field, Charizard goes to 50%, eats the berry. It's now at 75%. So it is worse than Heavy Duty Boots in the matchup where the opponent does set up Stealth Rock. But I think that extra bit of health in the matchups where they aren't up is fairly worth it. And I think when Charizard is Dynamax, having that quart of health is obviously not ideal. Or excuse me, having a quart of health loss is obviously not ideal, but I don't think it's that big of a problem. And then we have Excadrill, and I do have Rock Tomb. Hooray! It misses slightly less than Rock Slide. It still misses all the time, but more importantly, I have this very wacky EV spread. So the question is, what does this EV spread do? I had to have max speed. I already explained why. And so I instead decided, or excuse me, not instead, but I remembered the situation I brought up that happens quite often we end up in Excadrill mirror matches. And as I mentioned before, most of the extra drill are Mold Breaker with Focus Sash. So the idea here is, ideally I would have stand up such as that I outspeed the opposing extra drill. If not, it's a speed tie, and it doesn't matter. But basically with Dynamax extra drill, we click Iron Head, Max Steel Spike, which raises our defense. And at +1 defense, the opposing extra drill's Earthquake is a 3-hit KO thanks to this EV spread. I then put 92. The rest is in attack, and of course, because that without messing the special events, that would be an even number of stats we're messing EVs in, and we'd be wasting one. So I decided to take down a tick 1 point to put 4 special defense. Sorry, I don't know if that made any sense. Basically, this is a very defensive extra drill, and it's made to counter other extra drill. I don't know if that really made any sense. We then move on to Corsola. This is my replacement for Dracovish. Dracovish, as I mentioned before, really didn't do anything, and I was very weak to Gyarados, so I decided to bring something that can kind of... let me rephrase that. I decided to have something on the team that I knew I could always depend on to deal with Gyarados. And for me, that's Galarian Corsola. I'll talk about this a bit later. I'm not a huge fan of Galarian Corsola, and I think that has to do mostly with the fact that I really don't know how to play with Galarian Corsola. The way I always play it is I bring it into a Gyarados that probably clicked Dragon Dance, and then I click Strength Sap until Gyarados doesn't do any damage, in which case I Will-O-Wisp it, and then I just stall it out to death. I do have Hex because Nightshade. In the situations where I stay in with Corsola, I probably do click Will-O-Wisp anyways, and that usually happens before I go for a Nightshade. So I decided to bring on Hex, because that'll of course do more damage than Nightshade, and the opponent is more likely than not already burned. If not, it'll be affected by a paralysis thanks to Tyranitar Thunder Wave. In either case, more in the way I play Corsola, and the limited times I've played with Corsola, Hex is the better option over Nightshade. I do have Mirror Coat. I don't know what everyone else is running, but apparently people don't respect Mirror Coat Corsola. Corsola is super duper defensive. Strength Sap, of course, healing itself back to full whenever it's up against a physical attacker. But when it's up against a special attacker, it's bulky enough to not be OHKO'd, but it's not bulky enough to survive thanks to Strength Sap. Especially with those diminishing returns on the healing. So I instead have Mirror Coat. So if I'm up against a special attacker, instead of going for Will-O-Wisp, Hex, Strength Sap, which is good against physical attackers, I instead just click Mirror Coat. They hit us for a bunch of damage, but we probably survive, and then we just OHKO in return. Granted, in those situations, Corsola isn't bulky enough to survive whatever comes in, but trading is not that big a deal. Or excuse me, how should I say this? My favorite play style is that in which I take favorable trades against the opponent, as denoted by the fact that I decided to just go all in with some of the things I've been paranoid about. But yeah, let's move on to Vikavolt, and this is mostly the same with two key differences. The first is that EV spread. It's no longer modest with max speed, it's now bold with a bunch of speed. The speed, almost a max investment, but not quite, is enough to outspeed Dragapult at -2. That is to say, if whenever I click String Shot against something, I know I will always outspeed it unless it is Choice Scarfed. And of course, if I mentioned before, if Vikavolt is usually my lead, so if I know they're leading a Choice Scarf user, I can just bring something that can set up and win, such as Mimikyu or Excadrill, or sometimes Charizard. And so that's very nice, of course. And the rest is into the defenses. I believe that the defenses are to make a Jolly Excadrill's Mold Breaker Excadrill, Earthquake a 3-hit KO. I need to double check on that. I don't quite remember, but it's EV'd for something specifically. And more importantly, this Vikavolt, is more bulky in general. You'll realize I did mention there were two changes. The second one is that Vikavolt no longer has Volt Switch and now has Mud Slap. As I mentioned before, Vikavolt Volt Switch is really good against Gyarados, and Vikavolt is never facing Gyarados head on. And so what often ends up happening is the opponent will bring in a ground type at some point, and then I cannot do anything except for click guillotine. That's especially annoying when I'm up against a sash Excadrill, because I can't damage it other than hitting guillotine. But if it's sash, then because it's sash, I get into these awkward situations when it's against my other Pokemon. So I wanted some way to deal literally a non-zero amount of damage to opposing Excadrill, such that something like Charizard could come in and click Flamethrower freely, or my own Excadrill. And so I decided to go with Mud Slap. Unfortunately, Vikavolt does not learn U-turn. I thought it would because it's a bug. That's like what all bugs do. You click U-turn. But Vikavolt does not get that, so I did have to go for Mud Slap. I know it sounds funny that I cheese opponents by lowering their accuracy with Mud Slap, but I'm not depending on the accuracy boosts for... Vikavolt's job is not to reduce the accuracy of the opponent, it's to deal a literal non-zero amount of damage against ground types. But yeah, that's it for the team. As always, this team is not complete, although I've been playing a ton of games with the Sandy Vish team. I haven't played nearly as many teams with this Sandy-ish team. There are some things I would consider, again, items on Mimikyu, Tyranitar, and Charizard. I'm kind of just playing it safe with all those items, and I'm sure if I were a better player / I had more intuition as to what the metagame has to hold, I could probably change up the items to benefit the team more. Again, Vikavolt's job is really just to set up Sticky Webs / String Shot. Not in that order. It's usually String Shot and then Sticky Webs, and then deal a literal non-zero amount of damage, and then click Guillotine. But all in all, it's there as a sacrificial lead. I never plan to save Vikavolt. That's never in the game plan. And so I'm wondering if perhaps there is another Pokemon that serves a similar function, whether it's setting up webs or ensuring that it can support the other Pokemon in a similar fashion. So that's something I could keep in mind. Additionally, Corsola seems arbitrary. It's just kind of the first thing I slapped on the team that worked versus Gyarados, but doesn't particularly synergize very well. Whenever I'm switching in Corsola, I feel like I'm just stopping the entire team's momentum. And momentum is pretty important when I have all of these sacrificial leads in Vikavolt, and then I have all these setup Pokemon with Charizard and Mimikyu, or say Tyranitar and Excadrill. A lot of my team depends on each other for synergy, and Corsola has none of that. It's just kind of there. And yet another thing I wanted to point out is that I've been playing a lot of games on the ladder with this team, but the ladder is the ladder, which means it's not best of one. And I'm still not used to best of one. I really don't know how to adapt to an opponent. In the same way I know how I might approach adapting to opponent in a best of 3 in doubles. I mentioned again, VGC games are best of 3, but I'm not used to best of 1. I'm not used to best of 3 in singles. I literally have no idea how to go about that. I'm still figuring it out on my own, and more importantly, I don't have any secondary teams. On the last tournament, Sandy Vish was my secondary team, and I don't think I can just use my team from last time, because I really do feel like, especially now that I've gotten better at this game in such a short time, now that I think about it, I feel like the last team only worked because it was the very beginning of the meta and no one really knew what to do. The last team is not very good, to put it plainly. But I'm hoping that, again, I'm not really sure when my match with my opponent will be, but hopefully I can just steal someone else's team and play a few games with that, such that I'm not relying on this team for all 3 games. But yeah, that's it. This video is a lot longer than I thought it'd be. I thought I'd get through it quicker, but go figure, it's pretty long. But yeah, hopefully I didn't ramble too much. As I mentioned before, I played a ton of games with this team, and even though it's not my team, I'm pretty proud of it regardless, both in my growth. I mean, literally last time I was considering skilling Centino just because I was not confident enough that I could win with an actual team, and now I'm good enough to win with actual teams. Not quite good enough to build them or not modify them or play best of 3 games with them. But I'm growing, I'm improving, and at the end of the day, that's what this this game really is all about. It's about improving, and me just chronicling that. It's a good thing actually that I'm able to look back on these videos in the future and say, oh wow, that was a stupid decision. Why did you put uh, horn drill blunder policy on Exadrill? But it's a sign that I'm improving, and as I said before, and as I'll say till the day I'll die, life is all about improving yourself, and that's what I'm here for. But yeah, enough rambling, and I'll catch you guys next time when we actually battle. Until then, take care.